tax freight train is bearing down on your retirement. To protect yourself, you'll have to harness the power of zero.
Hello and welcome to the Power of Zero show. I am your faithful host, David McKnight, best-selling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You LERP, The Volatility Shield, and Tax-Free Income for Life. If you haven't had a chance to check out Tax-Free Income for Life, you can head over to Amazon or wherever you buy fine books. And I would love it if you bought a copy. I'd be absolutely honored and would love to get your feedback on Amazon. If you are looking for someone to help you navigate the pitfalls that stand between you and the 0% tax bracket, head on over to davidmcknight.com. We'll hook you up with one of our vetted, qualified, trained, elite Power of Zero advisors. And if you are a financial advisor looking for help transitioning your practice to a Power of Zero practice, you can head over to powerofzero.com to learn more. Today, I am going to re-air an interview that I had with Daniel Ronberg, who is the president of the Retirement Research Foundation. This is really a wide-ranging interviews where we talked about a lot of really important issues. We talked about the two great retirement risks I talk about in my new book. We talk about why people procrastinate the paying of those taxes, why people have a hard time pulling the trigger on their Roth conversions. We talk about an exchange that I had with a white coat investor over Roth conversions. Are we of the Power of Zero paradigm participating in what we call tax fear mongering? We address that. I give my take on financial gurus like Dave Ramsey, Clark Howard, and Susie Orman. I talk about what to expect in the next Joe Biden administration. And then we have a little fun at the end where we muse whimsically about the prospect of a debate between the Power of Zero side of the aisle and the experts who espouse what we believe and the Clark Howards and Susie Ormans and Dave Ramseys of the world. And finally, I like to talk about, we address whether there is a financial establishment. We talk about a political establishment all the time. Is there a financial establishment? So great interview. I'd like to thank Daniel Ronberg for interviewing me. Take a few minutes and have a listen.
David, welcome to the show. I'm so grateful to have you here on the Retirement Research Foundation. We are an organization dedicated to providing better education for the end consumer. And when I say better, that's kind of subjective. What I mean by that is we're trying to provide more objective information for consumers. There's a lot of pros and cons about certain retirement strategies. There's some stigmas that have developed over the years. There's some pretty rigid camps and lines that have been drawn on certain sides in terms of structuring and philosophy over retirement income. You have emerged as an authority in the retirement space, really around taxes, but your new book, which I want to discuss, and I just want to say I really thoroughly enjoyed, Tax-Free Income for Life, talks about really something that's fascinating me, which is the combination of two retirement risks occurring simultaneously: longevity risk. And I love that you had Tom Hegna, the father of guaranteed lifetime income, write the foreword. That was perfect. And tax risk happening simultaneously. And that seems to be the message of your book. And you lay out a step-by-step phenomenal strategy to deal with this risk. And it's really incredible. So I just want to say thanks for coming on the show. And thanks for writing this book, because there is so much, I'd say, misinformation and negative information around products like annuities, which you discuss in this book. And I think what you did was you took a really objective, down-the-line approach from the mindset of a consumer, and you say, look, this is what they're going to have problems with. Let's address each one and really put it into perspective, the 3% rule versus 10% free withdrawals. I really got to say thank you for writing this book. It was just a great read. I think it's beneficial to the end consumer to weigh out decisions. And I'm just so grateful to have you on. I'm a huge Dave McKnight fan, so this is huge for me. Why did you write this book now? Why all of a sudden did you go with the message of the two retirement risks occurring simultaneously, longevity and tax risk right now? Why was this book so pertinent today?
Well, I like to think that tax rate risk, which is, a drum I've been beating for the last 15 years, is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
But I don't have an ego about it. It's, when retirees get interviewed in survey after survey, when asked what are they most concerned about in retirement, certainly tax rate risk comes up, but it's not their biggest concern. Their biggest concern is that they're going to run out of money before they run out of life. And so what I've sort of observed over the course of time is that financial advisors sort of feel like they're pigeonholed into solving either one of those risks or the other. They sort of stand at this crossroad and they say, look, I can either mitigate longevity risk with an annuity, or I can mitigate tax rate risk by a series of Roth conversions and Roth 401ks and Roth IRAs and life insurance, but I can't do both. For example, if I want to mitigate longevity risk, historically, I've had to put a huge chunk of my otherwise liquid retirement savings into an annuity, which historically have been inherently illiquid. Which precludes you from being able to do any sort of Roth conversions or things like that. Conversely, if they want to do a lot of Roth conversions, they got to keep the money liquid, so they can't put it into annuities. And so my observation of the last 20 years of my career is that 99.5% of advisors fall into this trap where they mitigate longevity risk within the tax-deferred bucket, and that unleashes a chain of unintended consequences, the likes of which can really bankrupt your stock market portfolio 10 to 12 years faster than you ever thought possible. And so I really felt like it was important to make it very, very clear that it's possible to mitigate both of those risks within the very same financial plan. You just have to do it with the right kind of annuity, which has the right types of features that allows you to really build a plan around mitigating both of those risks.
So wise. I really appreciate those insights. And let me tell you something, David. Whenever I meet new financial professionals, literally the first thing I tell them is, I'm like, go get these. Like, you have to have these. Like, being somebody that practices now, right now I meet with clients still. To me, you're not relevant in the retirement space if you don't have some part of your company's philosophy centered in the power of zero message, which is you need to keep your eye on future tax rates for these people that you're building these income plans for. Totally irresponsible to set somebody up with a 401k only income and say, okay, that's going to be your income you're going to get forever without any adjustment for potential tax rate increases or inflation. So I think that, obviously your message has always been so valuable to prepare people for what's coming. And what I've always appreciated about your message, David, is you're going to be right at some point. Like, you're not one of these authorities who makes these like huge claims and you're like, next year the market's going to crash. I know that. And I'm telling you, you've always centered your message very simply in my mind around, hey, like, we're racking up this credit card and eventually that's going to have a consequence. Like, somewhere down the line, that's going to be paid for. And your message is really universal. When I meet with people, being that we're such a divided nation right now, it seems like Republican or Democrat, it's not a political issue. They both agree we're going to need to prepare for this. And I think that's what I love about your message is it's really truthfully universal and really needs to be around more. And being that it's so important, why do you think more people aren't taking steps to be proactive to get to the 0% tax rate in retirement? Why are people still not, we've been in these low rates for 4 years. What are people waiting for?
Well, it's sort of, what's the, I'm trying to think of physics terminology, an object at rest stays at rest. What people are concerned about is paying a tax to the IRS before the IRS absolutely requires it of them, right? As you know, I do a lot of speaking events like you do. And pre-COVID, I was doing about 90 a year, unfortunately. And I would routinely ask rooms full of people, how many of you guys think that tax rates in the future are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today? Every hand in the room would go up. Yep. And then I ask a very sort of telling follow-up question. How many of you have the lion's share of your retirement savings sitting in tax-deferred vehicles like 401ks and IRAs? And every hand in the room would go up. And so I found that there's this massive disconnect between what people believe about the future of tax rates and what they're actually doing about it. And what I've found is that our camp, our side, if you will, sure. There's more and more people are joining our camp. There's fewer and fewer skeptics. I'd like to tell the story about the white coat investor who famously wrote a blog post ripping my book, The Power of Zero. This is 5 years ago. He says so many people were referring the book to him, asking what he thought. And he finally said, look, you should not be doing Roth conversions because tax rates are not going to be higher in the future than they are today. Well, about 6 months ago, he wrote a Twitter post where he said, if Joe Biden gets elected, I'm going to convert all of my IRA to a Roth IRA all in 1 year. And I responded to his post by saying, I'm glad to see you're coming around, at which point he blocked me. But the point is this, more and more people are coming over to our site as they see the handwriting on the wall. They do the math. They realize we can't continue on at this pace without raising more revenue somewhere along the way.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, which is now that I have launched my first book this year, I can't help but read negative reviews when they pop up. So I was reading a couple of mine, and to try to make myself feel better, I popped over to your book and tried to see if I could read any of yours. And congratulations on the launch, by the way. 5,000 books in 1 week. That is huge. And with your publisher, that's awesome. But I wanted to say that, what I noticed when I read your reviews was there was this divide between people who are like, this is tax fear mongering, tax rates are going to be fine. And then people who are like, this is like the gospel of retirement planning. Like, you have this really staunch divide of people like, why is there this divide in the United States between these people who are like, defer, and hey, address this now? Where does that come from, David? Like, why do we have this problem?
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at my reviews and, I think it's 85% are 5 stars, maybe 4 or 5 stars.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
really that remaining 15% is divided between the 1s and the 2s. There's hardly any 3 stars. So you're right. There is a huge.
And it's not 50-50. It's just some people are way over here. There's like a small community, but most people, like you said, are like, hey, this is really relevant and important material that needs to be considered.
Yeah, I think you just have a lot of people who are really, really ingrained in the conventional approach to retirement planning, which basically says you're going to be in a lower tax bracket in retirement than you are during your working years. Therefore, you should defer as much as you can. And mathematically speaking, that's true. And so our biggest skeptics seem to be those who don't believe in their heart of hearts that tax rates down the road are likely going to be dramatically higher than they are today. That's part of why I filmed, you held up the documentary there.
I loved it.
The Power is Here, the Tax Train is Coming. Part of the reason that we filmed that movie was because we wanted to put a face on all of these experts who really are all reading the same music and they're all singing the same song. They're saying, look, tax rates down the road have to rise dramatically or we go broke as a country. We're going to swamp our ship of state. And some of them, among whom are David Walker and several others, said tax rates have to double or we go broke as a country. I wanted to have a collection of experts in documentary format that could serve as proof that we're not up in the night here. We're not making this stuff up. There are people that are very good at history. They're very good at math, as David Walker once said, who recognize we're on an unsustainable fiscal course. And every year that goes by where we fail to either dramatically raise taxes, dramatically cut spending, or some combination of the two, the fix on the back end is going to be that much more difficult and sort of increases the likelihood that you're going to have to pay more taxes in retirement.
Makes sense. I've like 3 or 4 more questions, David. You bring up some authorities in the industry. To me, okay, top 3 authorities in our industry today are going to be Tom Hegna, David McKnight, Van Miller. That's not in any particular order. That's my top 3. Who are your top 3 and why?
Certainly Ed Slott is got to be in the conversation. He's written forwards and blurbs on just about every one of my books because really he and I are 2 peas in the pod when it comes to our, he's been preaching about, the threat of rising taxes for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And, he sat through my presentation 3 or 4 times and every time he comes up, he goes, Dave, you're preaching to the choir. And so Ed Slott really has, been a hero of mine because he sort of paved the way for this type of stuff. Tom Hegna, as you said, he's the father of guaranteed lifetime income. He has done more for this industry in terms of, making this message and taking this message mainstream than just about anyone else out there. I mean, he talks about the math and science of guaranteed lifetime income, how, economists and mathematicians like Wade Pfau have really made the case that your money will last longer if you take a chunk of your liquid retirement savings and you put it in a guaranteed, a guaranteed lifetime income annuity. So certainly Tom is in the mix, and I can't not talk about Van. Van has really mastered the art of asking questions and taking difficult concepts and putting them into question format to help in a very Socratic way help our clients and prospects understand the implications of all of these financial scenarios that are playing out. And so certainly those 3 have got to be in the conversation. And I'm sure I'm missing out on someone. Wade Pfau has done a tremendous job of making the case for the math and science behind guaranteed lifetime income. And you can't talk about Wade Pfau without talking about Curtis Cloak as well. So all of those people have to be in the conversation. And
definitely,
I know I'm forgetting someone, so I apologize. I'm sure I'm missing some really big names here, but
well, you don't have to feel bad because I said you could only name 3, but since you're my guest, you could pick 5 or 6. What you're David McKnight? Why not?
Yeah, that's right.
No, it's an honor to have you here, David. Thank you so much. Let me ask you this question because obviously, you don't just focus on retirement and the scope of like insurance products and financial products. I'm sure you look at all kinds of information when when studying. And so let me ask you a question if this ever happened to you. I was watching a YouTube video the other day where a very, very famous and well-respected financial pundit had a lady call into the show who owned an annuity. And without gathering any material information, as soon as heard it was an annuity, said, take the 10% penalty or 12% penalty or 8% penalty or whatever the penalty was to get out. There was a surrender charge. Take that and go buy mutual funds today. You'll be way better off. When you hear something like that, and you know that so many people like not only respect, but absolutely, truly diehard follow whatever happens from these types of financial experts. There's so many of them that are out there and they do a lot of great work in a lot of ways. But when you hear something like that about annuities, is it possible, and I've been thinking about this a lot, that there's a new type of retirement risk, which is some type of risk where it's misinformation, not intentionally to deceive? Here's my point. Let me get to the point. There's a financial professional who says, this is good for you. 10,000 people are listening with different scenarios. They hear it's good for them. They think, oh, well, like they kind of bridge the gap and they go, oh, well, annuities must be bad. So that must be bad for me. I should follow suit, right? Is there a potential risk in consumers misinterpreting or overgeneralizing financial information from pundits? And is that a potential risk that consumers need to be aware of when digesting any material from financial experts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the risks is that if you're getting conflicting information from a lot of different sources, then you're paralyzed and then you end up doing nothing, which for most people, that's not going to turn out very well, simply doing nothing. Yeah. I think that these financial gurus on the internet and on TV, they are in the business of painting everything in a very broad brush. I mean, they have to package up these financial nuggets in a way that they can apply to a huge swath of people, right? Yeah. And what I found is that it's very difficult to take their information and their broad brush recommendations and customize those and tailor them for someone who has sizable means, someone who has a fair amount of money. And so what I found is that if I try to take, for example, a Dave Ramsey and take his one size fits all approach and try to jam that square peg into the round hole of all of the different clients that I come in contact with, it doesn't necessarily make sense for a guy who has, say, $2 million to pay off his home as quickly as he can. I mean, there's some math behind that's got to add up that doesn't really make sense. So while what David Walker says makes sense for the people that are making 50 but spending 60, it does not necessarily apply to all Americans. And I think that sometimes, unfortunately, the people who need the more customized and tailored strategies end up getting sucked in by those one size fits all. And that can be damaging, I think.
It's a great point. I appreciate that. You bring up something interesting too, a specific financial authority. This is something I wanted to ask you about because you did put together the Power Zero, which was an amazing accomplishment. And thank you, by the way, for everything you do for everybody. I mean, people don't realize like when you leave your family and fly all over the country for months to go film all this stuff, it's a lot of sacrifice. And we do appreciate it because it all makes a big impact in a lot of people's lives across the country. I mean, this movie has really done a great job of like getting people to see, oh, wow, no, this is something that needs to move up on the to-do list. And we need to like address this right now. My last two questions, one are about the next administration, because I just wanted to pick your brain about that. But along the lines of assembling something incredible like the Power Zero movie, would it be cool, or have you ever thought about a staged financial debate? And it'd be like, you mentioned Dave Ramsey, right? It'd be like, Ramsey, maybe like a Ken Fisher, and then like a Susie Orman, and then like a Hugh Hegna. Like from just a fan perspective, David, I would pay to watch that debate. That would be so cool to see.
Yeah. So you'd have on the one side, you'd have like, I can tell you exactly who the players would be. You would have, you'd have the white coat investor, you'd have Susie Orman, you'd have Clark Howard, you'd have Dave Ramsey, right? So those people would be on the one side. And then on the other side, you'd have Ed Slott, me. I don't know why you couldn't be there. Certainly Tom Hegna, Wade Powell. All of those experts could very easily hand those guys their lunch, because remember, those guys are in the business of one size fits all financial planning. And so when they get up there and they say cash value life insurance is a bad deal, they ignore all of the different contexts in which it can be used in mathematical ways that propel our clients and prospects much further ahead than where they would otherwise be. And so I would love the opportunity to point that out.
I think it'd be great. I think that somebody could make that happen. I think that I would be in support of that. You'd have your first ticket purchaser and you'd have your first potential. How would we get this set up? I'd be here to help and volunteer my time.
Those people would never do it. They have way too much. There's way too much downside and way too little upside for them.
Yeah.
So they would never do it. But if somehow we could pull it off, even with just one of them, I think it would be worthwhile to have that clip floating around the internet.
I think it would have to come from like internally, right? So it'd have to be like one of these things where like David, like your book became like to the point where it got on their radar so much. They were like, you know what? Let's do a fun debate. I mean, so much more entertaining than watching a Republican Democrat debate. Like they all say the same, they're not going to answer a question. Like it would be so fun to really like see some kind of fun debate. I'm just throwing it out there. Just a fun idea I wanted to float while I had time.
We have to also realize that this approach that you and I talk about on a daily basis, we're you talk about the establishment in politics. There is an establishment in finance. And I'll give you an example. When I launched my book, Power of Zero in 2018, at least the updated and revised version, it sold about 6,500 copies, was the number 2 most sold business book in the world.
Wow.
But it was not included on any of the bestseller lists. It didn't make the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. It didn't make the USA Today bestseller list. It didn't make the New York Times bestseller list. But it had sold enough copies to make all of those lists. And then when tax-free income... Did it sell them
diversely across the different like pools, or was it all Amazon?
Last time it was all Amazon. This time when we sold the 5,000 books that first week, it was spread among Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, BookPal.com. I mean, I was really taking pointers from Penguin Random House on where to get these books sold. And so it was a really even spread among all the different channels. And even though it finished at what would have been the number 3 most sold book in the world, or hardcover business book in the world, it didn't show up on any of the lists. So it's almost like
weird.
We're up against this, the invisible hand of the establishment to try to get this word out, which means that you and I have to work that much harder to make any headway.
We need like a celebrity. We need like, you know what I mean? Like you need like a Tony Robbins.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And that thought has crossed my mind, by the way.
I'll put me down for the next 10 pre-orders if you can. Let me ask you this question, David. Last technical question, and then we'll wrap up. You've been so gracious with your time. What can we expect from the Joe Biden administration? Obviously, there's been talk in the debates, and people know that taxes are going to change. 2-part question. It's not 2026, but is this the time you've been warning of? Like, did we just arrive? Or is it like not that dramatic, and people just need to be aware of a couple of basic adjustments? What's your take on the couple of percentage and rate changes and things like that?
Yes, I'll give you sort of a 2-part answer. First is it depends on, obviously, if the Democrats gain control of the Senate, and that comes down to the Georgia runoffs on January 5th. So if they pick up those 2 seats, then Joe Biden will push through all of his most wildest dreams in the first 2 years. Then it'll be such a liberal approach that he'll probably lose the House and the Senate come midterms, but he's going to push a lot of stuff through if he can gain control of the Senate. What is he going to push through? Well, he's going to immediately expire those tax cuts for anybody who makes more than $400,000. He's going to charge an additional 14% FICA tax on any dollar that you make up above and beyond $400,000. So consider somebody who lives in California. I've added up all the taxes that you'll pay. It ends up being about 71% on any dollar you make above and beyond $400,000. So you will be a marked man or a marked woman if you make more than $400,000 under a Biden administration if he gets control of the Senate. So that's a pretty big deal. He's talking about levelizing the deductions for the 401k. So, for example, as of right now, as you know, if you're in the 10% tax bracket and put $10,000 into your 401k, you get a $1,000 deduction. If you are in the 37% tax bracket and you put in $10,000 in your 401k, you get a $3,700 deduction. Sorry, $3,700 tax savings. He wants to levelize that. So no matter what bracket you're in, maybe you experience a tax savings of $2,500, whether you're in the 10 or his eventual 39.6. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen. I think that most people in the middle class, currently the 22 and 24% tax brackets, are probably going to be okay because I think what Joe Biden has identified as the middle class these days is anybody making less than $400,000. But if you are making more than $400,000, duck and cover.
Yeah. So what does somebody do, David? Like, people shouldn't panic, obviously. But I mean, if somebody's looking at that going, oh my gosh, I got to do something. Say you've done nothing. Say you have a $300,000 401k. You're in your 50s. You're getting close to retirement. You have a house almost paid off. Where do you start? What do you do?
Well, you have to educate yourself on where you think the fiscal condition of our country will be 10 years from now when you're going to be taking money out of those accounts. That's 2030. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that have said that there's going to be a perfect financial storm in 2030, and we could see a depression because of all the debt, because of all the unfunded obligations. Most of the budget will have to go towards interest on the debt. So we're going to have to raise revenue somehow. That, this perfect storm of factors could really take its toll in 2030. So do you believe in your heart of hearts that tax rates at that point will be lower than they are today? And if you do, keep on putting money hand over fist into your 401ks and IRAs. However, if you believe, as do I, that tax rates are likely to be much higher than they are today, then you should start to contribute to your Roth 401ks and your Roth IRAs and your cash value life insurance, and start preemptively paying taxes on those IRAs by way of Roth conversions. Step that money over to the tax-free bucket. So you have to be preemptive about this stuff, and you have to stretch that tax liability out over as many years as possible so you can stay in as low a tax bracket.
Makes sense. I love it. Love the message. Thank you for everything. The podcast is great. I really enjoy how consistent that's been, just coming out regularly. It's been amazing. The blog's awesome, and just everything you're doing, David. We really appreciate you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening today, folks. I hope you agree, as I do. That was a great interview that Daniel Ronberg did a great job and bringing to the fore a lot of really important issues. Once again, if you are looking for someone to help you navigate all of these issues, head over to davidmcknight.com. We'll hook you up with an advisor who's qualified to shepherd you through the process. And if you are an advisor looking for someone to help you transition your practice to a Power of Zero style practice, head over to powerofzero.com. As always, we could always use more reviews of all of our books, particularly Tax-Free Income for Life. That's the latest. If you haven't had a chance to review that yet, please go over to Amazon and write a fair and honest review. And if you have not yet subscribed to our show, please do wherever you stream podcasts. Thanks so much for being on the show today. We will look forward to chatting with you same time next week.